I thought I'd found peace in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place to unwind after long days as an FBI agent. Then I met Karen, the self-proclaimed ruler of the block, wielding fake HOA rules like a scepter and backed by wannabe cops who patrolled as if they owned the streets. She had no clue who she was dealing with, someone who doesn't flinch at threats. What unfolded next was a storm she never saw coming. Where are you reading this from today? The day started with a pounding on my door, so fierce it seemed to shake the house. It was barely dawn, and I stumbled from bed, still groggy, heart racing with the thought of an emergency. Peering through the peephole, I saw two figures in matching uniforms, HOA police emblazoned in garish yellow letters across their chests. Their badges looked like cheap party favors, but their stern glares and rigid postures screamed authority, or at least a bad imitation of it. My pulse quickened, not from fear but from the absurdity of it all. I cracked the door open, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice steady despite the early hour. The taller of the two, a man with a chiseled jaw and a smug demeanor, pointed at me like I was a suspect. "We're here on official business," he declared. "Your property has multiple violations. We need to inspect your garage immediately." "Violations?" I said, irritation flaring. "There's nothing in my garage that breaks any rules." The shorter officer, a woman with narrow, accusing eyes, snapped back, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We have authority from the HOA." I noticed they didn't mention warrants or real police. No official paperwork, no legal backing, just bold claims. Then I saw her, Karen, my nosy neighbor, lurking behind them with a smug grin that could curdle milk. She'd been a thorn in my side since I moved in, complaining about my lawn, my mailbox, even the way I parked my car. This was her doing, no doubt, a staged performance to flex her imagined power. My gut twisted, not with fear but with the realization that this was about to get messy. Stepping onto my porch, I kept my tone even. "I'm an FBI agent. If you have a legitimate issue, show me proper documentation. Otherwise, you're wasting my time." The tall guy smirked, undeterred. "Being FBI doesn't exempt you from neighborhood codes." Karen stepped forward, her chin tilted upward, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Oh, we're just making sure everyone follows the rules," she said. "You can't claim special treatment because of your job." I crossed my arms, staring her down. "What's this about, Karen? What's in my garage that's got you so worked up?" She shrugged, her eyes gleaming with malice. "I heard noises late at night. Could be anything, hazardous materials, maybe something illegal. Who knows what you're hiding?" I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "That's nonsense, and you know it. If there's a real problem, I'll cooperate. But this? This is harassment, plain and simple." The tall officer pulled out a piece of paper, typed no seal, no signature, just a flimsy form claiming I was under HOA investigation. It looked like something a teenager could whip up on a laptop. The woman officer flashed a plastic badge that might as well have come from a cereal box. "We have new powers now," she said. "Step aside." I shook my head, planting myself firmly in the doorway. "No warrant, no entry. You're not law enforcement, and you have no right to barge in." The man took a step forward, his voice low and threatening. "Don't test us." My anger surged, but I forced it down. As an FBI agent, I knew better than to let this escalate into a physical confrontation on my own porch. "If you try to force your way in," I said, "you'll be the ones facing charges." Karen's smirk widened, as if she'd been waiting for this. "You can't threaten us," she said. "Everyone on this street knows you think you're above the rules." Before I could fire back, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Glancing at the screen, I saw my boss's name, calling at this ungodly hour. My stomach tightened. He never called this early. "One moment," I said, stepping back inside. "We're not done here," the tall officer shouted, but I ignored him and answered the call. My boss's voice was clipped, strained. "Get to the office now. We have a problem." "Is this about a complaint?" I asked, my heart sinking. "I'll explain in person," he said, and the line went dead. I returned to the door, where Karen and her fake cops still loomed. "I have to go," I said, voice firm. "We'll deal with this later." The woman officer shook her head, her lips curling. "Leave now, and we'll mark you as uncooperative." Karen stepped closer, her gaze icy. You want your neighbors to see you running away? I sighed, exasperated. Karen, this is ridiculous. You know you can't arrest me. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. I'm not arresting you. They are. And I'm not stopping them. The male officer raised a pair of plastic zip ties, dangling them like a threat. My jaw clenched, but I kept my cool. Put those down, I said. Impersonating a law officer is a crime. You're aware of that, right? The woman grabbed her radio, but it looked like a prop, probably not even connected to a real dispatch. Karen clucked her tongue. You should listen. They have the power to write you up. A fake citation means nothing, I shot back. The tall man waved the zip ties closer. Want to find out if these are fake too? I realized then how far this had gone. They were baiting me, hoping I'd do something rash. It was a setup, plain and simple. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I'm leaving to handle an urgent matter at my actual job, I said. You need to get off my property. Now. Karen shrugged, her smile venomous. We'll be watching. The HOA has eyes. I barked out a laugh. The real HOA might. You sure as hell don't. The male officer's lips pressed into a thin line. One last warning, he said, glancing at Karen, who nodded. If you don't cooperate, we'll recommend disciplinary action. Recommend it to whoever you want, I said. Now get off my porch. They backed away, but not before the woman snapped a photo of me with her phone. Smile for the records, Karen taunted, her voice dripping with mockery. My stomach churned as I waited for them to clear my lawn, then slammed the door. My phone buzzed again, another message from my boss. Hurry. My body felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. This was the worst possible timing, especially if something serious was brewing at the bureau. Karen's smug face lingered in my mind, fueling my anger as I took 10 minutes to calm down, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The fake cruiser sat at the end of the street, lights off, a silent threat. Karen's car was gone. She was probably off spreading lies to the neighbors, twisting the story to paint me as the villain. I drove away, trying to steady my breathing, but my boss's urgent tone echoed in my head, more unsettling than Karen's antics. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting that fake cruiser to follow, but the road stayed clear. Still, I felt caught between two nightmares, the phony cops at home and whatever crisis awaited at work. I reached the FBI field office and hurried inside. My boss stood in the hallway, his posture stiff, his face a mask of tension. You took your time, he snapped, waving me into his office. I shut the door behind us, my heart pounding. Why are local authorities complaining about you threatening them? He demanded. I laid it out, the fake cops, the flimsy paper, Karen's vendetta. He stared at me, his expression grim. We've got a problem, he said. Higher-ups are flagging this. There's talk of misconduct, and I can't protect you if it escalates. My stomach dropped. I'm innocent, I insisted. Karen's framing me, trying to push me out. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. I don't care if they're real cops or not. There's paperwork claiming you resisted a lawful inspection. It's nonsense, but it's on my desk. If more complaints come, you're facing an internal review. Anger surged up my neck, but I nodded, knowing there was no quick fix. I'll prove they're fake, I said, though panic gnawed at me. As I left his office, my phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Better watch your step. We know who you are. I nearly crushed the phone in my hand. Karen had escalated her petty power trip into something dangerous, making it look official. The day dragged on, my coworkers' sideways glances cutting deep, rumors were already spreading. In the break room, Agent Davis pulled me aside. Got a minute? He asked, his tone cautious. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Karen thought she could ruin me with her fake rules and hired thugs. She was about to learn what happens when you push an FBI agent too far. I nodded quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Sure, I said, meeting Davis's gaze. He scanned the room, his eyes darting to the corners as if checking for eavesdroppers. His next words hit like a cold splash of water. Words going around you're on thin ice. Better watch your back. My stomach knotted, a sharp pang of unease. You mean here at the bureau, or back home in my neighborhood? His brow furrowed, his voice low. Maybe both. And keep an eye on that Karen woman. She's been crowing about getting you in hot water. By the time I left the FBI office, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I drove home, nerves frayed, my mind replaying Davis's warning. Were those fake HOA officers still patrolling my street? As I turned onto my block, my heart sank. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows sat parked a few houses down from mine. Its dark, reflective glass sent a chill through me. I pulled into my driveway, glanced at the vehicle, and noted its engine was off, no one stepping out. Forcing steady breaths, I hurried inside, locked the door, and yanked the curtains shut. No sooner had I settled than my phone pinged with an email from the Bureau's internal affairs team. They wanted details about my morning altercation with the local security detail. I sank onto my couch, the weight of the day pressing down. Karen had somehow tied her sham patrol to real authorities, and now my career was at risk. Those so-called HOA officers had left my property earlier, but their presence lingered in the neighborhood, and the Bureau's questions were piling up. Karen's schemes were tightening around me like a noose, and I had no idea how deep her influence ran. Later that evening, I spotted the same fake HOA cruiser idling at the end of my street. My pulse quickened as I parked, but I forced myself to move casually, avoiding any sign of fear. Inside, I peered through the blinds. The car hadn't budged, as if taunting me to make a move. I checked my phone, hoping for a reply from the real HOA or some crack in Karen's facade. Instead, I found a bounced email and a chilling voicemail from an unknown number. The voice was distorted, menacing. "We know you're poking around. Back off, or things get uglier." That single message confirmed my fears. Karen wasn't acting alone. The next morning, I dialed the official HOA number from an old newsletter, but it went straight to a robotic message about technical issues. Frustrated, I sent an email titled "Urgent, Possible Impersonation," only for it to bounce back as undeliverable. The neighborhood website was equally useless, filled with outdated information and no mention of new security measures. It was as if Karen had severed every legitimate channel, leaving me stranded without recourse. Desperate, I called Alvarez, a no-nonsense local cop who occasionally shared intel with the Bureau. I laid out the situation: fake badges, bogus citations, and a neighbor orchestrating it all. He sounded dubious but agreed to check the license plate of the HOA vehicle. "If it's a private security firm," he said, "they can't legally pose as law enforcement." While waiting for Alvarez's follow-up, tension on my block grew thicker. Neighbors I barely knew now whispered behind their hedges, casting wary glances my way, as if I were the troublemaker. One morning, Tamara, one of the few still willing to talk, showed up at my door, pale and shaken. She clutched a notice demanding a fine for unapproved exterior paint. I scanned the paper, same fake language they'd used on me, threatening eviction if she didn't pay. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I tried calling the HOA, but the line's dead. "Can Karen do this?" My blood boiled. "No, it's a scam," I said, wishing I had a fix. "Don't pay. I'll handle it." But Tamara just shrugged, fear etched in her face. "I can't risk my house. If no one's stopping them, maybe it's real." At the FBI, work became a gauntlet. My boss summoned me, his voice clipped with irritation. "I'm getting more complaints about your run-ins with local authorities," he said, tapping a folder on his desk. I explained Karen's fake cops and showed him the flimsy citations they'd issued, but he only frowned. "If they're private security, I can't just wave this away. The higher-ups are asking questions, and they're not happy." I left his office feeling trapped. Even if the HOA officers were frauds, their complaints were staining my record. I couldn't afford more trouble, but every day brought the threat of an official investigation. One evening, I spotted Karen in her driveway, arms crossed, watching me pull in. My nerves buzzed, but I marched over, determined to confront her. "We need to talk," I said, voice steady. She raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Go ahead." I kept my tone even. "You're sending fake officers after me and now targeting neighbors. Why?" Her lips curled into a thin smile. "It's not personal. This neighborhood has standards, and I'm ensuring they're met." My fists clenched. "By scaring everyone? That's not how it works." She shrugged. "They don't seem scared. They pay the fines, follow the rules, and life moves on. I pressed, "What's your goal here?" She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Goal? I'm just keeping the community in line. You're the one causing trouble." Before I could respond, one of her pseudo-cops sauntered over, flashing a cheap badge. "Move along," he barked. "We're discussing business with Ms. Karen." My jaw tightened. "You have no authority here." He smirked, waving his badge. "We're all the authority we need." I stepped back, not wanting to give them ammunition for another complaint. Karen shot me a smug look as they walked off together, leaving me seething in the street. That night, I dug through old HOA files in my office, hoping for answers. I found a proposal from years back for a neighborhood security program, spearheaded by Karen but rejected by residents who didn't want a militarized presence. Now it seemed she'd revived the idea on her own terms, using any means necessary. A chill ran through me. If she could hijack an entire community, could she have connections high enough to threaten my job at the FBI? Days later, Alvarez called back. "The plate traces to a private security outfit, but there's no record of a contract with your HNA," he said, sounding more convinced. "They're operating without approval." Relief mixed with anger. "So they're not real cops," I said. "How do I pin this on Karen?" He paused. "I need an official complaint with witness statements. Without others backing you up, it's just your word." My frustration surged. Karen's fear campaign had silenced everyone. No one, not even Tamara, was willing to file a formal complaint, leaving me to fight alone. At the bureau, the pressure intensified. An internal affairs supervisor called me in, her questions sharp and probing. She referenced a report filled with twisted half-truths about my aggressive behavior with local authorities. I laid out the truth, Karen's fake officers, the scam citations, but she just tapped her pen on the folder. "We're looking at all sides," she said coolly. I left her office, chest tight, knowing the complaints were making me look like a problem, even if they were baseless. Then, an envelope appeared taped to my door, bearing a fake HOA seal. Inside was a notice claiming I'd violated Ordinance 301, demanding a steep fine or further corrective action. My patience snapped. I slammed the paper on my kitchen table and called Karen's number, leaving a heated voicemail demanding she stop. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. A low, menacing voice hissed, "Don't threaten Karen again. We know your boss, and we can make your life hell." The call cut off before I could speak. Fury burned in my gut. These people were connected, or at least wanted me to think they were. That night, I stood at my window, staring at the quiet street. Porch lights glowed, lawns neatly trimmed, a perfect suburban facade. But I was caught in a twisted game, with Karen pulling the strings. I had no hard proof to expose her or clear my name at the bureau. My only lead was Alvarez's report on the unlicensed security firm, but without witness support, it wasn't enough. Then my phone chimed with an email, "Heads up. Internal review may launch soon. Rumors are flying." My heart sank. Another storm was brewing, and I was still grappling with a neighbor who'd weaponized fear to seize control. As I turned off my lights, I couldn't shake the question, what was Karen's next move, and could I survive it? With no solid evidence tying her to the scheme and my FBI career hanging by a thread, I felt the walls closing in, and the fight was far from over. The air in my neighborhood had grown thick with suspicion, and I stood on unsteady ground. Without neighbors brave enough to stand with me, I felt isolated, vulnerable to the schemes of Karen, a woman who had turned our quiet community into her personal fiefdom. Every step I took was shadowed by tension, my every move scrutinized not only by her but also by the looming pressure of my job at the FBI. The stress of being under investigation at work only amplified my fear of Karen's next move. She was relentless, and I was certain she was poised to push me over the edge. Whenever I left my house, I felt eyes on me. Sometimes it was neighbors, their once friendly faces now twisted with suspicion, whispering behind closed curtains. Other times, it was the unmarked car that lingered at the corner of my street, its tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, tracked, and judged in my own neighborhood, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. One late afternoon, desperate for a break from the suffocating atmosphere, I decided to run to the grocery store. A quick errand, I thought, might clear my head. But as I pulled out of my driveway, I caught a glimpse of a figure crouched behind Karen's impeccably trimmed hedge. Was it her? One of her lackeys? My stomach knotted at the realization that my own neighborhood had become enemy territory. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and forced myself to focus on the road. Halfway to the store, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. Against my better judgment, I answered. A gravelly voice rasped through the speaker, "Stop digging or else." Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving an icy chill in my chest. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, the words echoing in my mind. Who was it? Karen? Someone working for her? The ambiguity gnawed at me, but one thing was clear: the threat was real. When I returned home from the store, I found a crumpled flyer jammed under my windshield wiper. I glanced around, half expecting to see Karen's smug face peering from her window. The flyer read, "HOA police volunteers needed," listing a meeting date and Karen's address. My blood ran cold. She was recruiting now, luring neighbors into her web of fake authority. At the bottom, in bold letters, was a mention of a membership fee to cover uniform costs. The audacity of it made me shudder. If even a handful of people fell for this, she'd have a squad of bully enforcers patrolling the block, enforcing her made-up rules. I snapped a photo of the flyer for evidence, then tore it to pieces, not wanting it to linger in my yard like some toxic relic. As I walked up my front steps, I noticed the blinds in Karen's window twitch slightly. She was watching me, I was sure of it. But I refused to let her see me flinch. I shut my front door and bolted it tight, the metallic click a small reassurance in a world that felt increasingly hostile. Inside, I spread my notes across the dining table, a chaotic collection of warnings, fines, and bogus citations. Some were directed at me, others had been shared by Tamara, one of the few neighbors still willing to talk to me. As I studied the documents, a pattern emerged. Each piece was a stepping stone in Karen's calculated takeover, chipping away at the normal HOA processes until she could claim total control. She'd created a vacuum of confusion, then filled it with her own fabricated structure. The question wasn't just why she was doing this, but who was backing her. The gravelly voice on the phone didn't sound like any neighbor I knew. It carried a menace that suggested real power, someone with resources, someone dangerous. Karen wasn't acting alone, and that realization sent a shiver down my spine. That evening, I invited Tamara over to compare notes. She arrived with a thick envelope stuffed with documents, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. I found old newsletters mentioning Karen taking over the events committee, she said, settling at my table. Back then, we thought she just wanted to organize block parties and yard sales. Now I see she had bigger goals. I flipped through the pages, my disbelief growing. It's like she's been planning this for years, I said, shaking my head. Waiting for the right moment to strike. Tamara pointed to a line in a 6-month-old newsletter: "Local security guidelines will be enforced for the safety of all residents." It bore Karen's signature and a vague reference to third-party officials. Her hands shook as she placed them over mine. "Do you think any of this is legal?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I shook my head. Not a bit. But nobody's stopping her. We exchanged a grim look. The Real HOA board had vanished, either silenced or forced into hiding, and the police wouldn't act without clear evidence of criminal activity. As for the FBI, I was mired in internal reviews, my hands tied by bureaucracy. Karen was winning, and we were running out of time. The next day, I decided to take my evidence to Alvarez, a local police officer I'd spoken to before. Maybe if I showed him the full scope of Karen's plot, he'd see the urgency. I drove to the station with a manila folder stuffed with the flyer, citations, and other documents on the passenger seat. My heart pounded as I scanned my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that unmarked car tailing me. At a stoplight, I noticed a black sedan with tinted windows lingering behind me. When the light turned green, it stayed too close for comfort. My suspicions flared, but I forced myself to stay calm. When I reached the station, the sedan slowed, then turned down a side street. My pulse raced. I was almost certain I'd been followed. Inside, Alvarez ushered me into a cramped office, apologizing for the mess. I placed the folder on his desk and laid out everything: the threatening calls, the flyers, Karen's push for fake officers, and the rumors of her collecting money. He flipped through the pages, whistling under his breath. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. But how do we pin it on her? I leaned in. Her name's on multiple documents, and I can get neighbors to testify. If you need statements, I'll gather them. Alvarez frowned. We'd need those in writing, and your neighbors can't be too scared to sign their names. Otherwise, it's just hearsay. My shoulders sagged. My neighbors were terrified of crossing Karen, and I couldn't blame them. For all I knew, she had real power, or at least powerful friends. I asked about the tinted SUV, hoping for a lead. Alvarez scanned his computer. It's registered to a private security firm with ties to an out-of-state corporation. Could be a shell company, hard to trace. So a dead end, I said, my frustration mounting. He nodded, grim-faced. I can keep digging, but unless they break the law in a way we can prove, we're stuck. I thanked him, though I felt no closer to stopping Karen. As I left, my phone buzzed with a text from my boss. We need to talk ASAP. Be here first thing tomorrow. My mind spiraled with worst-case scenarios. Had Karen's fake HOA squad filed another complaint? Was she sabotaging my career in new ways? That night, I barely slept, my thoughts consumed by a sense of impending doom. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake to the sound of a car door slamming outside. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. A figure stood by the curb, staring at my house. My heart raced. Was it Karen? The silhouette was different, taller, bulkier. After a moment, they climbed into a vehicle and drove off, leaving me rattled and wide awake. The next morning, I dragged myself to the FBI headquarters, bracing for the worst. My boss was waiting by his office door, arms folded. "This is bad," he muttered, ushering me inside. He dropped a file onto his desk. "I've got a dozen complaint forms here, all from your neighborhood. They accuse you of misconduct, threats, even property damage." My mouth went dry. Property damage? That's absurd. He rubbed his temples. "I know, but it's in black and white, official statements with addresses and signatures." My head spun. Karen had clearly coerced neighbors into signing false reports. Now it looked like my entire community was turning against me. My boss sighed. "I believe you when you say this is a setup, but the higher-ups see a pattern. This is going to escalate unless we figure out the truth soon. Give me a chance to prove these people are impersonators," I pleaded. "They're not recognized by any real authority." He nodded slowly. "All right, but we can't shield you forever. Internal affairs is breathing down my neck." A grim silence settled between us. I thanked him, knowing my time was running out. As I left, desperation surged through me. Karen was strangling my career with her cunning moves. If I didn't act fast, I'd be fired or sidelined before I could expose her. By the time I got home, I was emotionally drained. The fake cruiser was back, parked outside my house with its lights off. I approached it, determined to confront whoever was inside. The window rolled down an inch, and a harsh voice snarled, "Back off or you'll regret it." My heart hammered, but my resolve hardened. Karen's empire of fear had to be stopped. I drove to the FBI headquarters again the next day, my pulse racing. My boss had warned me about an official inquiry into my misconduct, and the weight of the accusations was crushing. Weeks of harassment, false reports, and Karen's relentless pressure had left me exhausted. As I entered the lobby, I noticed colleagues giving me wary looks. Word of my troubles had spread, and it felt like I was wearing a scarlet letter. In the conference room, a panel of stern-faced higher-ups waited. My boss stood at the back, looking grim. An older agent cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the numerous complaints against you, alleged threats to neighborhood authorities, and repeated refusals to obey local laws." My heart pounded. "Those authorities are fakes," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Their badges aren't real, and the HOA they claim to represent is a sham." The agent raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" I handed over my folder of documents, the flyers, citations, and notes from Tamara. "This shows a pattern of intimidation and fraud. Karen's behind it all, and I believe she's working with someone powerful." The panel exchanged glances, but their expressions remained skeptical. "We'll review this," the agent said, "but the complaints against you are mounting. Until we have concrete evidence, you're on administrative leave." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I nodded, too stunned to argue, and left the room. My career was unraveling, and Karen was tightening her grip on my life. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof, that she was the puppet master behind this nightmare. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was heading into a confrontation that could cost me everything. Back home, I sat at my dining table, staring at the scattered documents. Tamara's words echoed in my mind. She's been planning this for years. Karen had turned our neighborhood into a battlefield, and I was her primary target. But I wasn't alone. Tamara was still with me, and Alvarez was willing to dig. I just needed to find the crack in Karen's armor, the one piece of evidence that would bring her empire crashing down. As night fell, I heard another car door slam outside. I peeked through the blinds, my heart racing. The same bulky figure stood by the curb, watching my house. This time, I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo, hoping to catch something identifiable. The figure lingered for a moment, then drove off into the darkness. I wasn't sure what Karen's next move would be, but I knew one thing: I couldn't let her win. My job, my reputation, and my home were on the line. I had to fight back, no matter the cost. The air in the FBI hearing room was thick with tension, the kind that settles into your bones when you know you're being cornered. I sat at the polished table, my badge heavy in my pocket, facing a panel of 3 agents whose faces gave nothing away. Their eyes, however, were sharp, dissecting every word I'd said. My boss, Agent Daniels, sat beside me, his jaw tight, offering little comfort. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I'd been harassing my neighbors, strong-arming them into compliance with a rogue HOA operation. It was absurd, but the panel held a thick file of complaints, 10 maybe more, claiming I'd bullied residents in my quiet suburban neighborhood. You never approved their actions, the lead panelist, a steely-eyed woman named Agent Carver said, her voice cutting through the silence. She lifted the file, its weight evident in her grip. Yet we have statements from at least 10 neighbors claiming otherwise. They say you intimidated them, coerced them into following your rules. My blood boiled. The accusation was a lie, a carefully crafted setup, and I had the proof to unravel it. I have documents, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. This so-called HOA police force is a private security firm with no legal standing. They're extorting residents, and I can prove it. The panel exchanged glances, their expressions guarded, unreadable. Before I could elaborate, the door swung open with a creak that echoed in the sterile room. In walked Karen Garrett, the last person I expected to see. She wasn't in her usual casual neighborhood watch attire, yoga pants and a clipboard. Today she wore a tailored suit, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, and carried a sleek black briefcase. My mouth fell open, shock rendering me momentarily speechless. What is she doing here? I blurted, my voice raw with disbelief. One of the agents, a wiry man with thinning hair, cleared his throat. Miss Garrett has submitted evidence on behalf of the local enforcement group. My mind spun. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood watch, was here to testify against me in an official FBI inquiry? She stepped forward, calm and collected, her heels clicking on the tile floor. "Good morning," she said, her voice polished, almost rehearsed. "I represent the interests of our community. I'd like to correct a few misunderstandings." Daniels shot me a stunned look. He hadn't warned me Karen would be here, and from his expression, he hadn't known either. My throat tightened as Karen opened her briefcase with a flourish, producing a neat folder. "These files include reports from the neighborhood watch," she said, laying them on the table with deliberate care. "They show repeated noise complaints, suspicious activity, and even a few alleged break-ins linked to Agent Harper's address." "That's a lie," I snapped, my voice cutting through her performance. But Karen didn't flinch. She continued, her tone smooth as silk. "We asked him many times to cooperate with our volunteer police program, but he refused, claiming we lacked authority." She let out a delicate sigh, as if pained by my defiance. "We only wanted to keep our streets safe." I stared at the panel, struggling to keep my composure. "Karen is not telling the truth," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "She started this scheme months ago, scaring neighbors into supporting her. She's using fake citations to squeeze money out of them. I've seen the forms myself." Agent Carver raised a brow, her expression skeptical. "Do you have these forms with you?" My heart sank. Not physically, I admitted, but I emailed them to. Karen shook her head, feigning disappointment. I'm afraid we have no record of that. Perhaps Agent Harper is confused. My anger surged. She was better prepared than I'd anticipated, weaving a narrative that painted me as a rogue agent terrorizing the neighborhood. I opened my mouth to protest, but then came the twist that made my jaw drop. The older agent on the panel, a grizzled man named Agent Torres, turned to Karen. Before we proceed, we should disclose your family connection. Karen gave a curt nod, her lips curving into a pitying smile as she glanced at me. Yes, of course. My uncle is the deputy director of this bureau. I tried to handle this matter quietly, but when Agent Harper's behavior escalated, I had no choice but to bring it to his attention. My stomach lurched. The deputy director, Michael Garrett, was near the top of the FBI's chain of command. If he was her uncle, it explained everything: how she'd shut down the real HOA's communication lines, how my neighbors felt powerless, how her complaints had reached my supervisors so quickly. The room seemed to tilt as the weight of her influence settled over me. Agent Torres cleared his throat. Given Miss Garrett's connection, we must ensure impartiality, but these claims are serious. Agent Harper, can you provide concrete proof of criminal activity? My voice wavered, but I pressed on. I have records showing the security firm is unlicensed. I've spoken to neighbors who've admitted they're being extorted, but they're too scared to come forward. Karen pressed her lips together, her expression dripping with insincerity. My family and I care deeply about law and order. We only encourage people to keep our streets safe. My vision swam. Karen wasn't just a meddling neighbor, she had roots deep within the agency itself. I was alone, cornered by her well-placed influence. The meeting ended with a promise that Internal Affairs would launch a formal investigation, not just into my conduct but also into any possible wrongdoing by Karen's group. Yet as I walked away, I felt like I'd lost ground. Karen beamed at me on her way out, murmuring, "Better watch your step." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to shout in front of my superiors. Daniels jogged after me in the hallway, his face grim. "I had no idea she was related to the deputy director," he muttered. "This puts us in a tight spot. You're not off the hook." "I know," I said, exhaling shakily. He gave me a sympathetic look. "Do yourself a favor. Stay calm and gather any evidence you can. We'll need more than hearsay." I left the FBI building in a daze, the weight of Karen's connections pressing down on me. Her uncle was one of the highest-ranking officers in the bureau, giving her access to resources and influence I hadn't dreamed of. If she could convince my neighbors to back her lies, what could she do with the deputy director's power behind her? My knees felt weak as I reached my car. There was no guarantee Internal Affairs would believe me, not when Karen had official channels on her side. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white, struggling not to panic. My badge, once a source of pride, felt like a burden. Even as an FBI agent, I was fighting an enemy who had the agency's leadership in her pocket. My only hope was to expose her private security scam beyond any doubt, but with her family ties and my reputation on the line, I realized I might have to risk my career to bring her down. Driving home from the inquiry, I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Karen's influence reached the top of the FBI, and I was under a darker cloud of suspicion than ever. Daniels had tried to reassure me, but his words lacked conviction. As I pulled into my driveway, every nerve was on edge. I scanned the street for the fake HOA cruiser or the tinted SUV that had been lurking around the neighborhood. It was late, and most houses had their lights on, but the road seemed empty. I let out a shaky breath, hoping for one normal night. The second I stepped inside, my phone buzzed with a text from Tamara, my neighbor and one of the few who'd confided in me about the HOA's tactics. They're at my door. I'm scared. My heart pounded. I grabbed my jacket and rushed to Tamara's house on foot, sticking to the shadows. Sure enough, the so-called HOA officers were parked in front of her place, their engine idling. As I crept behind a hedge, I saw two men on her porch, pounding on the door. The taller one, a burly guy with a buzz cut, yelled, "Open up, or we'll mark this as another violation." My anger flared. These bullies had gone too far. I cleared my throat, loud enough to get their attention. The taller one turned, his face twisting into a scowl. "You again," he muttered, grabbing at something on his belt. I held my ground, raising my voice. "I'm FBI. This is intimidation. Leave her alone. The second officer, shorter and wiry, reached for his phone. That line won't save you anymore. We have friends in high places. I nearly laughed at the irony. They were admitting their connection to Karen's network. Tamara cracked the door open, her eyes wide with fear. Please just go, she whispered, trembling. The taller officer whipped out a form. We need you to sign this statement confirming that your friend is harassing the neighborhood. My pulse jumped. They wanted her to turn against me. Furious, I stepped forward. Back off. She's signing nothing. The second officer shoved me, and I stumbled onto the porch steps. Before I could regain my balance, the taller one pulled out plastic zip ties, a nasty smirk on his face. I'd be careful, he warned. One wrong move, and we'll file assault charges. I managed to keep my composure. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. I'll see you behind bars. He pointed a finger at me. You won't get that chance. It sounded like a threat that went beyond HOA fines. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? I turned to see Alvarez, a local cop I'd contacted weeks ago about the suspicious activity. Relief swept over me as he approached, badge out, his expression calm but firm. The fake officer stiffened, clearly unsure how to play it. Alvarez surveyed the scene. Ma'am, he addressed Tamara, are these men trespassing? She nodded, tears brimming. Yes, they won't leave. Alvarez turned to me. I got your text about suspicious activity, but it took me a while to swing by. He faced the officers. Show me some identification. The taller one flashed a phony badge, but Alvarez didn't blink. That's not official, he said. I want a driver's license right now, or you're both coming in for questioning. The officers glanced at each other, then the shorter one stammered, we have the right to be here, authorized by the HOA. Alvarez crossed his arms. You don't have the right to threaten a homeowner who's telling you to leave. This is private property. Step away from the door. The officers hesitated, then backed off, muttering under their breath as they retreated to their vehicle. Tamara exhaled, her hands shaking. Thank you, she whispered to Alvarez. He nodded. I'll follow up on this. Harper, you need to get those documents you mentioned. Hard copies, not just emails. I will, I promised, my mind racing. Alvarez's arrival had bought me time, but the encounter only confirmed how deep Karen's operation ran. These weren't just overzealous volunteers, they were part of a coordinated effort, backed by someone with real power. Back at my house, I sat at my desk, combing through every file I'd collected. There were emails from neighbors, screenshots of fake citations, and a grainy photo of the unlicensed security firm's logo on their SUV. It wasn't enough, not yet. Karen's uncle being the deputy director meant she could bury evidence or discredit witnesses. I needed something undeniable, something that would hold up in court. Tamara called me later that night, her voice hushed. I found something, she said. One of the neighbors kept a recording of a meeting where Karen admitted the fines were a way to fund community improvements. She didn't know she was being recorded. My pulse quickened. Can you get it to me? I'll try, but they're watching my house. I'm scared they'll come back. Stay safe, I urged. I'll come by tomorrow. The next morning, I drove to Tamara's, my eyes scanning for the SUV. It wasn't there, but the air felt heavy, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Tamara handed me a USB drive, her hands trembling. This is it, she said. But be careful. They know you're onto them. I spent the day analyzing the recording. Karen's voice was unmistakable, casually discussing how the fines were necessary to fund their operation, even laughing about how easy it was to scare residents into compliance. It was damning, but I needed more, proof of the money trail, or a direct link to her uncle. I reached out to a contact in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, someone I trusted to keep things quiet. Can you look into a private security firm called Safe Street Solutions? I asked. They're operating without a license, and I think they're funneling money somewhere. My contact promised to dig, but warned me to tread carefully. If the deputy director's involved, even indirectly, this could blow up in your face. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. The neighborhood grew quieter, but the tension was palpable. I caught glimpses of the SUV circling at odd hours, and neighbors avoided eye contact. Then, my contact came through. Safe Streets is a shell company, he said. The funds are being routed to an offshore account, but I can't tie it to anyone specific yet. I need more time. Time was something I didn't have. Internal Affairs scheduled another hearing, and Karen was pushing harder, flooding the panel with new complaints. I gathered every piece of evidence: Tamara's recording, the financial records, witness statements from neighbors who'd finally agreed to talk, and prepared for the fight of my life. At the hearing, Karen sat across from me, her smile as sharp as a blade. The panel reviewed my evidence, their faces unreadable. I laid out the case: the unlicensed firm, the extortion, the recording. Karen countered with more polished lies, but this time, I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. Agent Carver leaned forward. "These are serious allegations, Agent Harper. If true, they suggest a coordinated effort to undermine this agency's integrity. We'll need to verify every detail." As the hearing adjourned, Karen approached me, her voice low. "You're making a mistake," she said. "My uncle won't let this stand." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I'm not afraid of you, or your uncle. The truth is coming out." Driving home, I felt a mix of dread and determination. The evidence was strong, but Karen's influence was stronger. I was risking everything: my career, my reputation, maybe even my safety. But as I pulled into my driveway, I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't stop until her scam was exposed, no matter the cost. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as I stood on Tamara's porch, my heart pounding. Two men in ill-fitting uniforms, claiming to be part of the neighborhood's new HOA police, had just left after a tense confrontation. They'd sneered at me, their eyes cold and mocking, before speeding off in their cruiser. Tamara, my neighbor and friend, was trembling, her face pale as she recounted their threats. I tried to steady my own nerves, knowing this was no isolated incident. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, was behind it all, and her grip was tightening. The trouble had started months ago when Karen, leveraging her uncle's status as an FBI deputy director, began her campaign to control the neighborhood. She'd formed a so-called homeowners association, HOA police force, a group of hired muscle posing as legitimate security. They patrolled the streets, issuing citations for minor infractions, unmowed lawns, noisy kids, even suspicious behavior, and demanded payments to avoid legal action. Most neighbors complied out of fear, but I wasn't one to back down. As a federal agent, I knew their operation was a sham, but proving it was another matter. Karen's connections made her untouchable, or so she thought. Tamara's voice broke my thoughts. "They want me to blame you for everything," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "They said if I didn't sign their paperwork, they'd drag me to court for violating HOA regulations." Her hands shook as she clutched a crumpled citation notice, its text filled with vague legal jargon and no official seal. "It's a bluff," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Their paperwork has no legal backing. We'll prove it." But doubt gnawed at me. Karen's influence had already wormed its way into an FBI inquiry against me, painting me as a troublemaker. Half the neighborhood was under her thumb, coerced or bribed into compliance. If I was going to take her down, I needed hard evidence, something even her uncle couldn't dismiss. I stayed with Tamara for a while, talking through our next steps. She agreed to give a formal statement to Officer Alvarez, my ally in the local police department, about the harassment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time I left her house, night had settled over the neighborhood. Crickets chirped, and porch lights glowed, but an uneasy chill hung in the air. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "You're out of time. Cooperate or lose everything." My chest tightened. Karen's circle was growing bolder, and I was running out of time. I slipped inside my house, locked the door, and sank onto the couch. Karen's hold was massive, her uncle's influence shielding her from scrutiny. My mind churned with ideas, each riskier than the last. Confront her directly? Dig into her financial records? Rally the neighbors? Every option felt like stepping into a trap. Exhaustion pulled me under, and I drifted off, haunted by thoughts of job suspension or worse. The next morning, I found a slip of paper stuffed in my mailbox. "Meeting tonight at the community center. Be there." No signature, no details. It could be another of Karen's ploys, designed to humiliate me or paint me as a threat. But curiosity and desperation prodded me forward. If she was holding a public gathering, I might catch her slipping up, maybe even record her lies. Still, I couldn't shake the fear that this was a setup. Alvarez texted me as I stared at the note. "We need more witnesses, or I can't file charges. Press them." A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. If the meeting was real, it could be my chance to gather testimonies and expose Karen's scheme. The clock was ticking, and this might be her biggest power play yet. I had to attend, even if it meant walking into a trap. That evening, I prepared with meticulous care. I slipped a small recording device into my jacket pocket and ensured my phone was fully charged, set to record audio. I texted Alvarez my plans, just in case things turned ugly. His reply was swift: "Be careful. Call if it gets bad." Taking a deep breath, I headed to the community center, my mind buzzing with strategies. The community center was packed when I arrived. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, and most of the neighborhood was there, murmuring nervously. Karen stood near the front, holding a stack of papers and chatting with her supporters, neighbors who'd plastered "We support the HOA" signs on their lawns. A makeshift podium sat on a small stage, flanked by two of her fake HOA police, their arms crossed like bouncers at a nightclub. I took a seat in the back, hoping to blend in. Karen stepped up to the podium, her voice dripping with forced cheer. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. As you know, our community has faced challenges lately: disruptions, rule violations, and safety concerns. That's why I established our HOA police to ensure a safe, orderly neighborhood." Applause erupted from her loyalists, but others exchanged uneasy glances. The tension in the room was palpable. Karen continued, her tone growing sharper. "Unfortunately, some individuals resist our community standards." Her eyes flicked toward me for a split second before she gestured to her fake officers. "Thanks to our dedicated volunteers, we've issued citations for noise violations, unkempt lawns, and suspicious activities. It's about keeping our streets safe and preserving property values." I couldn't stay silent. Standing up, I called out, "That's a lie." Heads turned, and Karen's smile faltered. "Excuse me," she said, her eyes narrowing. I stepped forward, projecting my voice. "Your so-called HOA police are not legitimate. They're part of a private security group with no legal authority to issue fines or citations. You're running a scam, Karen." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the fake officers moved toward me, but I held up my badge. "Federal agent. Touch me, and you'll regret it." He hesitated, glancing at Karen for guidance. I pressed on, pulling out my phone to display screenshots of Alvarez's findings. "This is proof your HOA police are unlicensed and unauthorized. The security company they work for has no contract with our community." The room buzzed with murmurs. A man stood up, looking shaken. "Karen, is that true? Are they not real security?" Karen's bravado cracked. "They're volunteers," she stammered. "Volunteers don't have the right to detain people or issue fines," I shot back. "You've been making up infractions to extort money from your neighbors." I pointed to the stack of papers on the table beside her. "Let's see those citations. I bet they're as fake as your authority." The crowd surged forward, eager to see the documents. Karen's hands shook as she tried to pull them away, but a neighbor snatched one and held it up. "This doesn't look right. There's no official seal, no signature." Karen's face went pale. "That's confidential," she snapped, grabbing at the paper. But the damage was done. More neighbors demanded answers, some snapping photos of the bogus paperwork. The tension hit a breaking point when one of the fake officers muttered, "I didn't sign up for this," and bolted out the door. Alvarez appeared at the entrance, his uniform crisp and his expression stern. "Everyone stay calm," he announced. "We're investigating unauthorized security practices and possible extortion." He walked toward Karen. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me for questioning." Karen sputtered, trying to rally her supporters. "This is harassment. I have connections. You can't do this." But her allies were silent, their loyalty crumbling. Alvarez cuffed her and nodded to me. "Good work," he whispered. As Karen was led out, Tamara approached me, her eyes shining with relief. "You did it," she said softly. I gave her a tight smile, adrenaline still coursing through me. Neighbors came forward, some apologizing for complying with Karen's demands out of fear. The truth was out, and the neighborhood was waking up. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Statements were taken, paperwork was filed, and an official HOA audit revealed Karen had been pocketing fine money. Her uncle denied involvement, but the scandal forced his quiet resignation. The fake HOA police vanished, their security company facing legal action. My boss called me into his office weeks later, offering a rare smile. "You were right all along," he said. "Internal affairs cleared you. You're back on track." Relief washed over me. I'd held onto my career and reputation despite Karen's sabotage. Walking out of the office, I let out a deep breath. The neighborhood was just a neighborhood again, no fake cops, no phony citations. I'd survived the storm and brought down the woman who thought she could rule our quiet suburb like her personal kingdom.